Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. Okay, our Week 7 reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get almost anything for game day. Okay, a very eventful Saturday night and Sunday. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, 3 and Out podcast at the Volume. Let's start, and we're going to spend some time on Kansas City and San Francisco. Both teams, hemorrhaging wide receivers. And I thought this is the real separator between Mahomes and a good quarterback. Mahomes had an ugly pick. Brock had multiple picks. Brock had 3. But there were 3 or 4 moments in this game. The shotgun 4th and 1, Mahomes running it in, the 33-yard run. And I felt in this game, it'd be easy to pick on Brock Purdy because he didn't play well, but Mahomes didn't play particularly well. But there is something to be said about being resourceful, which I think Andy Reid and the Chiefs have made a living on. They're still ham and egging this wide receiver core. Nobody's ever healthy. Today, Purdy had to deal with that. Debo was sick. Then Ayuk had a big drop. Then Ayuk gets hurt. Listen, they're going to pay Brock Purdy. We know they're going to pay him. But in this moment, and again, it's Mahomes, but I thought there was a separation, kind of these 3 or 4, 2 or 3 magical moments, and it felt like Mahomes had all of them.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really box score scout Mahomes this year. They've been pretty terrible. But halfway through that game, when they were, they didn't have a large lead, but it felt like they were in control of the game. If you just watch, Mahomes always made big plays. And one thing they've done, and this is where Veach gets a ton of credit, and Andy being boys with Spags and bringing him on board, they're a defensive team. I mean, that defense creates havoc. The pass rush,
coverage,
all their DBs can cover. They can lose DB after DB, and they get random guys making plays. So everyone's on the same page because the guy's blitzing nonstop. You got to be able to cover. But yeah, I mean, Mahomes just comes through. They have a little magic with him and Andy in the biggest spots. And they did benefit today from Purdy and Kyle just they were bad. I mean, the Niners are awful in the red zone. Purdy, you cannot afford. I think there's a couple different angles to this. One, why are we always in such a rush to pay guys that you don't know for sure? Right? Like, I got no problem paying Josh Allen after year 3, paying Patrick Mahomes. Even the Ravens butted head with Lamar Jackson. Yeah. I mean, Lamar Jackson's going to go down beside Ray Lewis is the second greatest player in the history of the franchise. He's not a free agent. He's going into his 4th year. Let's take a deep breath. If he keeps playing this shitty against good defenses, Minnesota, turn the ball over. Tonight, turn the ball over. Now, there was one might not have been his fault, but the other, you just need some more plays. You can't go, well, all these injuries. Well, who are the Chiefs playing with? Just make a couple plays. No one's saying you're Patrick Mahomes, but this was a pretty winnable game for the 49ers, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Tom Brady said this. He said this twice with Purdy. 2 of the bigger Purdy completions downfield. Both balls were underthrown. Both.
Well, one's a touchdown at the end of the game. There's 11 minutes to go, and they're down, 2 points. Instead, he ends up throwing the pick and ends the game.
So again, I like Brock, but people struggle to contextualize things. I like Sam Darnold, but this is a perfect situation. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, good run game, excellent protection, brilliant coach, top defensive coordinator. Darnold is now playing better, and he was really good today. We'll get to that in 15 minutes, but it's a perfect situation for Sam Darnold. He went from Adam Gase, a terrible situation, to a perfect one, and he's somewhere in between. This has always been between Shanahan, Trent Williams, Kittle. So today, to me, the whole game came down to the Brandon Ayuk drop. And that forces a punt. McCole Hardman, big punt return. That was the game. That was the moment. Now, who knows what happens? But once again, San Francisco's special teams are a huge liability in a big game.
Well, that's on the coach. Their special teams coverage have been just horrendous since Kyle has been there. He does not care. I mean, that's the only way you can sum up their special teams units I'm not talking about kicking and punting. I mean, they're on their third kicker in 3 weeks, but the actual coverage units, it's on the coach. Andy Reid, what does he do? Hire Dave Tobe, widely considered the best special teams coach, going back to Chicago with Devin Hester. See, I go even further because it's 21-12. Cowing, the kid from Arizona who can fly, smokes the corner who just comes in. And even Brady's like, listen, obviously you got to hit the pass, but you hit that in stride, he walks into the end zone. So then you're down. Your field goal wins the game at that point. There's 11 minutes to go. Instead, he has to stop. He gets tackled. A couple plays later, he throws a pick. And he's not Mahomes or Josh Allen as a deep ball thrower, but that wasn't the hardest deep ball to throw. Right. Like, you got to hit that in stride, but think of how the entire game has gone. No confidence, not playing well, doesn't have much cohesion with that player. It was just, I just get back to this. If you have question marks about these quarterbacks and they have years to go on their, what's the difference between paying a guy $53 million and $58 million? It's going to cost you more. Well, I mean, I'd rather know for sure. Like, at the end of the day, the Cowboys, they know exactly who Dak is. So why didn't you just pay him a year and a half ago if you're going to pay him? It does save.
He's been in the building forever.
But you're still, he's their guy. He wasn't going to go anywhere. Not that you're kicking Purdy to the curb, but I'd never understand this rush if we got questions. Let's just see this season play out, because when they play good defenses now, Minnesota and Kansas City, like, you can't afford turnovers. You cannot afford turnovers. And this year, Purdy, the fumbles, obviously the picks in big spots, it just cannot happen. If you can't overcome them with just incredible brilliance like Mahomes somehow is doing this year, because he's turned the ball over a lot, Colin, but it hasn't seemed to matter.
Well, as Brady pointed out during the game, there was a stat that first and second down, Mahomes is getting rid of the ball quickly. On third down, he's holding it for 3.5 seconds because he's trying to make big plays. But he realizes he can't do that all the time. And, the other thing with Mahomes, when he missed Worthy on that over-the-top throw, he overshot him. That's okay. He's not going to give you a chance to intercept the ball. But I have like 6 different plays here. There's a flip by him. He throws against his body to Travis Kelce for first down. I have 6. I got sheet after sheet after sheet of notes for this game. Yeah. All 6 are Mahomes plays. Now, I that's not to say, right now, Seattle's in first place in that division. But I said coming into the season, John, you can only be so old so long. And Debo comes in sick. Ayuk gets banged up. This Niner team, Detroit is like a younger version of the Niners. And younger players, when they do get hurt, recover more quickly. And I kind of feel like the red zone issues are mostly Christian McCaffrey. But I kind of feel like watching Shanahan today was a moment. You're at home. Kansas City's vulnerable. No Rashee Rice. Players go down, and they use McCole Hardman like he's a number 1. And it's just, I think that you have to look at the game as a Niner fan and go, we're not beating these guys unless we got to get more special at certain places. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and for a large portion of the game, and this gets back to when they struggle, is they couldn't run the ball. And when Kyle can't run the ball, his passing game is built off that. He can't just drop back and throw consistently. He's not comfortable calling plays like that. And my one knock on him, as he is a really good coach, and he's proven to be a brilliant play caller over the years, but I wouldn't call him the most adaptive play caller. Not. His offense is his offense. It's very specific. It's completely different, but like Mike Leach ran what Mike Leach ran, right? Kyle runs what he runs. And if he's gashing you in the run game, the passing game runs off that. He can't just go, he has to keep running the ball even when it's not working, because his passing plays are all bootlegs and everything off play action instead of just spreading it out and let Purdy in college. And listen, I'm not acting. And one thing I've always pushed back against when people criticize, he's not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. But relative to the majority of guys over the course of his career, he's been better than or equal to the Daks, the Cousins, the Goffs. But you have to rely on him sometimes. Just spread it out if the run game's not working. And then you notice when they started getting back, Mason started hitting some runs. And that's when Kyle feels the most comfortable. Andy Reid is a good example. Now, he's much older and much more experienced. It doesn't matter. If something's working, he can ride it. If it's not working, they can adapt. It's like Kyle, it's very, very specific. And I just think that so dependent on the run game, I know Pearsall came back from getting shot, so it's hard to put, but he is a first rounder. Cowing is a talented player. You got Kittle out there. Mason can catch the ball. You can still throw the ball if the run game's out. The Chiefs were lined up. I dare you to run the ball. We're going to stop it. And through the majority of the game, they neutralized.
I mean, think about early in the game. So Kansas City faked a punt, stuffed. They had a pick, and they couldn't get points out of it. And it's like, okay, that when you play Kansas City and you're at home and you snuff a punt and you get a pick, you got to get a touchdown.
Chiefs tried to hand them the game.
I mean, it was right. And I wrote those down. I'm like, Purdy got no points for those. And Kansas City by the second quarter led 7-3. And it's like, okay, that is that not the, because a couple different times I put, ball game. But when then Ayuk, drops the ball, Hardman has the big punt return. Mahomes has that nice flip for a first down. Next play, they do a reverse, right? 8 yards. What you're seeing is, honestly, you're seeing a separation between Andy Reid and the rest of these coaches. Because Shanahan's top 5 to 6 this game today. And when Hardman had that big punt return, and I wrote this down, Andy immediately went into the bag of tricks. He knows you're reeling. He knows guys aren't focused. San Francisco's pissed. Oh, God, we didn't do this. And he goes, and when you're angry, you over pursue. When you're angry, you play with more emotion. And he goes to deception and tricks. He's completely manipulating San Francisco, knowing off the punt return, they're reeling a little bit. They're pissed. Now they want to make a play. And he goes against your emotion, does flips, reverses. And they put Carson Wentz in the game at one point, like in these high leverage situations. I mean, this is how you win. This is Michael Jordan and the Bulls on bad nights. You'd have these high leverage possessions. Michael hits a jumper, Pippen makes a block, and a tie game becomes a 5-point Bulls lead like that. And they just milk the clock for 40 seconds, hit free throws, and they win the game. Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week. Games you can't miss. Coverage begins at 7 Eastern with football's best party. TNF tonight, Thursday Night Football tonight. If you're not a Prime member, no problem. Sign up. 30-day free trial. Cancel anytime. Thursday Night Football, and it's on Prime Video. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
Think about why Andy does that. Carson Wentz play is a great example. Bye week, they're undefeated, but they haven't played that well. But he's not, some crazy a-hole where he's going to be angry all the time like Belichick and Parcells the way they coached. So he puts that in over the bye week to kind of loosen everyone up, have a good time, keep other people engaged, and people get to look forward to that. This is a team, Colin. The league is very, very lucky that they are banged up at wide receiver. Because I use it. We were talking before you hopped on. Like, if they just had Tyreek Hill, they'd be unbeatable. Well, he's been gone for a while. Let's just say Rice was healthy. Pacheco was healthy. Hollywood Brown had played. The rest of their guys were playing with Worthy. This team would go 16-1 with ease. I mean, I don't think that if they were remotely healthy, they'd be unbeatable because their defense is dominant.
Yeah, I mean, John, Rashee Rice, when he was healthy, he was a 1.
Well, he's become...
he's become a 1. He's not Justin Jefferson, but he's a 1. So, there was...
The Niners can't score in the red zone, and the Chiefs, in theory, shouldn't be able to either, but they manipulate it, and they are able to find it because of coaching. And this is... I noticed this last week in the Seattle Thursday night game, is there were a couple play, or 2 weeks ago, Ryan Grubb, a couple plays didn't hit, but it was like, damn, those guys were open. It was just off. If the Niners played Seattle every week because they own Geno, they'd win 15 games. But when they play Seattle, you're like, that's the old Niners. And then they play these other teams, and they kind of look like a shell of themselves. Today was weird. Obviously, guys got injured and sick. But I just can't do excuses when the Chiefs are playing that way too. You still got Bosa out there. You still got Fred Warner, Charvarius Ward. You got a lot of money worth of players. I mean, the Chiefs, it's 28 points, but there was a late touchdown. The Chiefs had struggled to get to 20 again for the majority of the game.
Yeah,
you're at home.
Kansas City literally has no hole. San Francisco has a red zone hole, a special teams hole, a Brock Purdy in big spots hole. I mean, these are now established issues. The red zone, it's established. Special teams, San Francisco, it's established. Brock Purdy in the red zone can't make plays. It's established. Brady said something today about this. He's like, I mean, he's trying to be kind, but like at one point, these linebackers, these no-name linebackers for Kansas City. Now, Bolton, everybody knows, but it's like, who are these guys? They got injuries.
Yeah.
I mean, they just, it is it's like when New England was dominating, you're like, I don't really think they have the best roster, but they had the best offensive line coach, the best quarterback, and the best tight end. And you started looking around and you're like, where aren't they great? And you're like, well, they don't get a lot of sacks. And then you look up and you go, oh, they were second in the league in pressures. They were kind of a holeless team. They weren't great everywhere. Yeah. They were terrible nowhere. Kansas City, best coach, best defensive coordinator, best quarterback, best general manager. I just don't. If Rashee Rice can play, this team's winning 3 straight. I just don't see anybody beating them.
I text someone today. You know who they feel like right now is the Alabama Saban dynasty, where players changed. Some years you'd watch them, you're like, they're not as good as previous years, and then the dust settled and they're right there in the championship game. You're like, how the hell did they do this? And it was because of Saban in the program. And Saban in the program for the Chiefs is Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And I think Spags, they have a unique thing going because their defensive coordinator is probably never going to become a head coach. So they get this guy that now has institutional knowledge, who's elite at his job. And they have this cohesion. So many teams, you got the coaches not agreeing with the GMs and the owner. It's like they're all on the same page. Andy, Veach, Mahomes, Spags, they're all speaking the same language. And they have the best quarterback in the biggest spots, even when he's not playing well. Isn't he, use the Michael Jordan reference, Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, even when they were playing their worst, you still believed when it mattered the most they were going to come through. And isn't that Patrick Mahomes? He could throw 17 picks in a game in the fourth quarter in a tie game. I believe he's going to make it.
There was once they trailed 7-3 off stuffing a block punt and getting a pick. And I was like, okay, that was your moment. That's where a Baltimore could take a 14-3 lead. And you're like, oh shit. Now Kansas City's reeling and has to bail water. But if you can't nail those down, then that's not it. You're just not going to do it. So and by the way, the Ayuk drop early in the game it's just bad karma, holding out.
He's had a lot. He's had a lot of them, Colin, this year. I mean, he's had 5 or 6.
Listen, he had a year left, and he decided, I'm holding out with a year left on his contract. There's going to be some animosity. I don't think Kyle's holding it against him. In fact, after the drop, he patted him on the sidelines. He's like, okay, we need you. But there is something to be said. We don't want the NFL to become the NBA. You'll get paid if you're great. Even running backs now, Saquon, you're going to get paid. You're Austin Eckler. Yeah. Somebody's going to want you. I mean, running backs had a huge weekend. You're going to get paid. But you hold out a year early. I mean, look how fast Odell Beckham became irrelevant. I mean, it takes one injury to a player in this league. They're not tackling you in pro basketball. It takes one injury, next man up, and you're just not needed. And so I think Ayuk, he's needed on this team. I think Cowling, the 4th-round pick's better than Pearsall, potentially. I think he runs better.
He can fly.
So, listen, it's
Niners are in trouble. Luckily, they got the Cowboys coming up Sunday Night Football, though. That's might be a get-right game. The Chiefs, are we looking at 14-3, and then the dust settles, and you go, how the hell did they just do that?
I kind of feel.
And this is, I mean, Andy is really kind of establishing himself. I mean, we've had this argument before, but he has a couple, 3, 4, 5 more years. I mean, and it's not like he plays golf. I mean, he's not, as long as he's healthy, he's coaching for the foreseeable future. I think we talk Belichick, Lombardi, Andy Reid, I mean, this is remarkable, the stuff he's doing right now in the NFL.
The 3 best coaches in my lifetime are Bill Walsh, Bill Belichick, and Andy Reid. Now, I think there's some Jimmy Johnsons, young John Madden. There's some really, really, really good coaches out there. But to me, I'm not going to count.
Holmgren was pretty damn good
he
with
was
the
great.
Packers.
Holmgren was great. He got Hasselbeck in that Seahawk team. Name 5 guys on that team. Hutchison, Sean Alexander, Hasselbeck. Can't name the defenders. Holmgren was sensational. So, listen, I think it's Bill Walsh, it's Belichick, it's Andy Reid. And, get right game. the Dallas Cowboys.
I think Kyle really needs to look at Andy and just see how he's adapted. I know he's much older, but you have to be willing to adapt your offensive play calling. You can't just be so beholden to one thing. For a long time when Andy was young, it was just throw the ball,
Yes,
run the
in
ball.
Philly.
Well, as this team has become dominant, he's much more inclined to just include he's always thrown the ball to the running back, even when he got to Kansas City, Jamal Charles. But I would say these last 5 years with Pacheco, that they are just much more likely to. Today, he's got Kareem Hunt off the street, and they're just handing him the rock. He'll do whatever it takes now. It's not about style points. And I think Kyle sometimes, like, my offense or the highway. It's like, well, Kyle, your specific thing, you have to. There's so many different flavors now of offense. You have to integrate some different stuff into your packages. And I think he's very hard-headed that way. And I think that limits them sometimes in the red zone. I think it's why it's hard. In a weird way, it's easy to play quarterback for him because it's a quarterback-friendly offense when you're running the ball. But it can be difficult when things go wrong because it's kind of there's only one thing to do.
Tom Brady, because he was drafted in the 6th round, and to some degree because Kurt Warner wasn't drafted, those are complete Haley's Comets. Those are outliers. Brock Purdy was passed over by everybody 6 times, most teams 7 times. Is that he's clearly cognitively very sharp, accurate thrower of the football, but in these big spots, you can see the lower round pick. It's like Dak Prescott, it's a 4th round pick. You can see it. Yeah. Kirk Cousins' movement, you can see it. And this sport, I watched Shedeur Sanders again this weekend. That kid is moving, putting balls into teeny windows. There is something to be said for first round picks. Okay, Detroit 31, Minnesota 29. So for years, I love the quarterback position. I talk about it. And for years, the one guy I've really supported is Jared Goff. And people have shit on him for years. And I've said he's a much better version of Matt Ryan. And Matt Ryan was a really, really good quarterback and an MVP and got to a Super Bowl and probably should have won one. If not for one of the great catches, Julian Edelman, in the history of the sport, he wins a Super Bowl. Goff was on a freaking heater the last 2-3 weeks. I mean, he's 22 of 25, 2 touchdowns, 281 yards. With this, when he had Andrew Whitworth and McVay in the Rams, and now he's a better version of that because he got more snaps with Detroit. John, he is all steak and no sizzle, but is a pure thrower of the football. He is feeling it. He's a guy that's he's like when Steph gets on those hit 5 straight threes, you're like, okay, this stuff he's unconscious. Goff today was just spinning it. He threw a couple of balls into coverage. Remember, this is Brian Flores, who has befuddled Purdy and J.C. Stroud. I mean, literally flummoxed them. I'm looking at Jared Goff today. We've had 2 years of this guy. Take out Mahomes. I'm not sure in a 3rd down and 7, take out Mahomes. I'm not sure there's another quarterback in the league I want throwing the ball. He's that good. Now for a segment called Making It Look Easy, brought to you by Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Today, Josh Allen made it look easy. 21 of 33, 2 touchdown passes, over 300 yards. Bills blow out the Tennessee Titans. Josh even found new Bill Amari Cooper for a score. He made it look easy. Morgan & Morgan does the same to submit a claim. They have over 100 offices nationwide, more than 800 lawyers, with over $15 billion recovered for all their clients. Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record fighting to get you full and fair compensation. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. If you're ever injured, go to forthepeople.com/Colin, forthepeople.com/Colin, or dial pound 529. Check out America's largest injury law firm. Winning in the NFL is hard. Hiring Morgan & Morgan is easy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought there were 3 games a day early on. You felt the intensity that felt like playoff games. Obviously, the Niners, Chiefs, the Packers, and Houston. Yep. And obviously, I think the game of the day was the Minnesota-Detroit game. If you hit him, he can't move around. But their offensive line is fantastic. Their offensive coordinator, I don't quite understand his deal, why he's kind of scared to be a head coach, what's going on there, but he is brilliant. Yeah. And their general manager and front office deserve a lot of credit. Because listen, Goff's been good for a long time. The guy got to a Super Bowl with McVay.
Yeah.
He went through the downturn when he hurt his thumb, and McVay and him had the weird fall off. But when they got down, one thing that happens in Minnesota when you get down early, it's like, God, are they going to overwhelm the Lions? Because that place gets super loud. They've been up when they started the first couple games, and they just kind of boat race you. And that didn't happen today. And I think the Lions, like today, might be one of their grittiest wins of the last couple of years. But I'm with you. I mean, I think Jared Goff, he's a throwback. I mean, there aren't many guys. I mean, he's better than Cousins
Is
at
he
this point.
Is he the last pure pocket quarterback taken number one? Pure pocket.
Well, I just don't think we see those guys ever again in college.
Yeah.
They just don't really exist. I mean, I think he's a throwback in the sense that that'll never come up into when you just watch college football these last 3 or 4 years. When do you ever see a good player that plays like Jared Goff? Even I watched the USC Penn State game because I missed a lot of it last year. That quarterback is a little bit old school, but he moves a lot better than Goff, right? Aller for Penn State. I just don't think you see the Flaccos, the Elis, the Phillip Rivers. So those guys have to master getting rid of the ball, being accurate, knowing the offense. Like, you have to be perfect. You watch Jordan Love today, he's just kind of free. It's like, doesn't matter. You're like, yeah, I think you need to work on the fundamentals a little bit. Like, Jared Goff's fundamentals have to be perfect because he can't move outside the little radius. And they got so many good players. They got such a great offensive scheme. And it feels when you watch him, you're like, this guy has mastered his offense. Right. The timing of the throws. And one thing I think he really developed, I remember he got shit on pretty hardcore that first year with Jeff Fisher. And then the divorce with Sean McVay was not pretty. Because I kind of took Sean McVay's side. I'm like, well, maybe this guy, I think, I don't remember a guy coming back and going, this guy, remember when Alex Smith resurrected his career? You're like, this guy's mentally tough. And I think Jared Goff falls under that. You're like, this guy's got some mental fortitude to play for that coach too, who, let's face it, is much more of a tough guy, rah, not exactly, I mean, that's kind of the style with Detroit. We're going to out-tough you mentally and physically. And I think, Jared Goff fits that mold perfectly. Flacco did for a long period of time with Baltimore, just a tough guy. And I think Jared Goff, it's not even debatable. I mean, he's just been fantastic. His career these last couple of years in Detroit, you could argue, is more impressive than what he did in LA. Is. Because everyone kicked him to the curb. I saw a stat today, like, he's the first guy since like Kurt Warner back in his prime to have 3 straight games of 140 plus QBR. I think the other guys like Peyton Manning over the last 25 years. I mean, the numbers over the last three weeks are eye-opening. But their talent, that draft, Colin, a couple years ago, where they got Gibbs, Laporta. How about Brian Branch, who had a fantastic pick today? He had another one that was called back because the guy stepped out of bounds, but it looked like he returned a touchdown. The impact players they got in that draft to overcome the Hutchinson injury. I was tempted to bet on Detroit, but I was like, that's a pretty huge emotional letdown, losing that guy. And then they're down 10-0. I'm like, glad I didn't do that. That team is very, very, they got a little Ravens and Chiefs, like mental toughness to them, don't they?
Yeah. And Sam Darnold, by the way, 22 of 27, Sam moves very well. I mean, Sam didn't play bad. I think it's a perfect situation. I mean, Justin Jefferson just changes everything. I mean, but Sam made a couple of deep throws today.
I think in the second half, he was like 13 of 14. He was brilliant in the second half. He
hit Jordan Addison on a big play. I think Sammy's good. I don't know how far Minnesota goes in the playoffs, because I really do feel like Detroit's now become the class of the NFC. I really feel that. But I'll tell you what.
I think Minnesota's pretty good.
So do I.
Like, I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl, but they're they are no like one and done in the playoffs. They could beat anybody. Right. They're tough. They probably play on the road, so who knows, depending on the venue. But they're good, well coached. They got firepower. Detroit's on a slightly another level, but I was impressed with Minnesota.
So I think Detroit's the best team in the NFC, and then I think there's 2 or 3 teams behind them: Green Bay and Minnesota. But Darnold made a throw to Jefferson for a touchdown. He made a throw to Jordan Addison. The thing about Sam, you got to eat some of the reckless. You do with Allen, Mahomes, you just got to eat some of it. But Sam, he's a playmaker. And I think in the NFL, I think the highs of Minnesota may be higher than Detroit, but the lows will be lower. I kind of feel now with Detroit, John, I get the exact same game every weekend. The exact same game. Dominant O-line. And it's funny that you think, oh, they'll go out and they'll replace Hutchinson, and they may. Jacksonville won. Had they lost, I think they'd have just emptied the roster perhaps to get more picks.
Yeah.
But when I watched that game, Detroit, Minnesota today, your takeaway had to be these are two of the top 4 teams in the NFC. I think they're
well. I think the one pitch the Lions have that no one else has, that their offense top to bottom is like the Katie, Warriors. I mean, they got an elite offensive line. They have a quarterback who's a proven Pro Bowl guy and can win playoff games. They have everything at wide receiver. Yeah. They got a possession guy who's elite. They have a speed guy who's one of the fastest guys in the league. They have, when he's healthy, one of the best tight ends in the league. They have multiple dominant running backs. I mean, they got one of the more physical guys in Montgomery, and Gibbs is, I don't know, the young version of Alvin Kamara. I mean, how good is that guy? His speed, he had a run today. It looked like Barry Sanders in the open field, making the guy miss on the touchdown. And then their play caller, because his cohesion, usually most teams in this scenario, that guy has just become a head coach, and they've had a new name filling that spot, and it's usually a little rocky. Well, this guy just keeps turning down head coaching jobs, and the offense keeps getting better. And in that spot today, like, it wasn't about trick plays, which they love to pull out. Today was about, you got to call big third downs. We're going to need big explosive plays, and especially down early. I mean, I think Dan Campbell is a guy, and rightfully so, after that press conference. He's obviously speaks a little different than a lot of these like intellectual offensive guys, even though ironically Dan Campbell is an offensive guy. But he's got a little more Harbaugh to him, feels a little more like offensive defensive lineman. What the hell's the difference between him and like one of the Harbaugh brothers? I mean, I understand it's the NFL, so every team has money, and if you draft well, you can turn around. But that's just not the way it works. I mean, there's a reason the Lions always suck. The Jags the same teams are always bad. He has turned the Lions into a power. It'd be one thing if it was 1 year. No, this is like the same thing. And this is different this year. Everyone's gunning for him, right? Everyone takes him seriously. They're not sneaking up on anybody.
Yeah. And I think they don't have the owner of Kansas City, but I think it's hard to watch Detroit and not go, front office, out of this world. Coach, culture setter. Their schematic guy is Ben Johnson, best offensive line in football, best run game in football behind that O-line. I mean, if you told me today I had to bet Kansas City against Detroit in the Super Bowl in the field, I may take the Chiefs and the Lions. That's how strongly I felt today.
And the Chiefs would be a tough matchup for them. Or, I mean, the Lions would be a tough matchup for the Chiefs because it's hard for the Chiefs to get to 20 points, So even if the Lions play bad, they can get to 25 kind of with their eyes closed. That's the thing. Now, it'd be hard to bet against the Chiefs, and they'd probably be an underdog. But that's where the Hutchinson injury, I think you feel even more confident getting aggressive. Because you look around the league, like why wouldn't you?
John,
like, hey, Raiders, are you sure? Like, you guys are going nowhere. What do you want from Max?
I said this week on FS1, Detroit is one of the only teams in the league. They don't have a need. Now that Branch is on the back end, it's like, just give up your first round pick. Just go get the best guy. This team for about another year can withstand giving up a first. They've hit on so many picks. I mean, even Kansas City, you'd be like, don't give away that first round pick. Go get a tackle. Go get an offensive tackle. Like at 31, there's some kid offensive tackle. I think Arizona may have one. Go get a tackle. Detroit, they got their tackles, their receivers, a deep threat, 2 backs, tight end, edge rusher. They don't have needs. I would give up a first rounder for that. And by the way, Hutch comes back. You have 2 edge rushers. So what?
No. Yeah, good luck beating me next year. All my guys are under contract.
Right. Okay, I want to talk about this game third. You're a former scout of the Eagles. 28-3 win over the New York Giants. Eagles 28, Giants 3. There was a couple of things. First of all, it's going to be a bad day in the Giants facility. Bad day in the Giants facility. So Daniel Jones got benched at the start of the 4th. Andrew Thomas is out, which just I should have bet this game. J-Mac he tried to talk me into it. You take Andrew Thomas out, this team can't move the ball. But they benched Daniel Jones at the start of the 4th. Jalen Hurts was bad on third down, but Saquon Barkley jammed it right down the Giants' throat. And John, it's one thing if somebody comes back, a Johnny Damon comes back to haunt you, if you're a Red Sox fan.
Yeah.
this was like the most predictable facial in the league. And I looked at that and I thought, it's going to be a bad day. Like, it's over for Daniel Jones. Like today, when they benched him start of the fourth, that was just like, it was kind of like they waved the white flag on Daniel Jones and probably the season.
I know you talk to a lot of people in the NFL. I can't tell you how many people their jaw hit the floor when the videos that came out of that Hard Knocks and the things they allowed. And obviously it has to go through the GM and the head coach, but I would imagine the owner, like if the owner did not want him saying, I don't know if I can sleep if he's on the Eagles, it wouldn't have come out. That felt some of those things that came out in that Hard Knocks made me feel like the owner wanted it out. And if by the time people are listening to this, Joe Shane is fired, I just don't see. Remember when he was asked, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't think the Eagles. I think he's going to go to the Bears." And listen, I understand overpaying running backs and it's difficult, but when he went to Philly, I thought the moment when I watched that in the offseason, how is he going to have a bad year? They draft multiple offensive linemen every year. They have arguably the best offensive line coach, who Jason Kelsey calls like his father in Jeff Stoutland. And he's rushing for 100 plus yards in all these games pretty easily. And when they're semi healthy at wide receiver, like things are going to open up for him. Today, when it was like, I think he had like 6 or 7 carries for almost 20 yards. And they announced it. I'm like, I bet he's going to bust one soon. And then he bust that 50-yard run, and it was on. And it wasn't just Daniel Jones getting benched with 10 minutes to go. They also pulled Jalen Hurts for Kenny Pickett. So it's like you're benching your quarterback, and they waved the white flag, and Saquon Barkley's unbuckling his pads with like 7 or 8 minutes after he already has 100. He had 175 yards in 3 quarters, Colin. And I just think that, and listen, I understand they have injuries, and like you said, without Andrew Thomas, the Eagles, who have struggled to get a pass rush, they were in the backfield on Daniel Jones every single play. They had guys coming from every angle. He had no shot. That one, the owner said it. I don't know if I could sleep. He's our most popular player. He's our best player. And now that's a team that's loaded with talent. And what's Saquon? Second or third best player on their team. On given games, he's their best player. To do that to you at home, to just embarrass you, what is the papers? I guess it's more the internet now, how people consume the local talk shows there, the local television. What are they going to say tomorrow? How does Joe Shane... Ryan Dable, I actually think, has done a pretty good job now that he's transitioned to the offensive coordinator. Like, guys, his quarterback is atrocious. I mean, that guy is he can't play. And I would imagine Drew Lock will just be the quarterback and just see if they can give him a spark. That's a tough one for the GM.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale. If you make a mistake, I see this a lot in a lot of businesses. Don't get arrogant. Don't get stubborn. Don't double down. They should never have drafted Daniel Jones 6th. Gettleman's a goofball. And then, I've been through a lot of these drafts, Dave. He's not the 6th best player in college football. He's probably not the 56th best player in college football. And then they double down on it. I mean, I like Dable. I think they have their left tackle. I like Malik Neighbors, Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau. There's some players here, but it doesn't matter. Listen, people are getting bigger and stronger. You watch the Chiefs and the Niners today. They're like 8 players left the game. People get hurt. You have to have a difference maker at quarterback that can overcome these injuries. And Daniel Jones is a classic example. He needs everything right. The minute you take Andrew Thomas left tackle out, it's over. It's just over. He can't do it. And again, listen, I watched Mahomes get blown out in the Super Bowl without his left tackle. But I think the Giants just have to start over. I think they have some nice defensive pieces. I think they have to start over. And I think you just have to go. I mean, Daniel Jones, I don't think he has a market. Maybe a 6th-round pick, a 5th-round pick. Does he have a market? It's time for this week's player I thought might give almost anything to redo his game. Brought to you by Uber Eats. Kirk Cousins, Falcons quarterback who I love. 2 interceptions, a fumble today, and the Falcons lost to Seattle. The last 3 possessions for Cousins all resulted in a turnover, including a fumble that led to a 65-yard scoop and score. That was this week's Uber Eats Player of the Week. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now.
Oh, no. With how much money he makes, I think he's an untradeable player. I think when you look a couple years ago, remember when A.J. Brown was traded to the Eagles, and the Eagles played him like in the middle of the season, and A.J. Brown went nuts. And John Robinson, who I've known since I was at Fresno State, I think he's pretty good, got fired the next day. Got fired the next day when A.J. Brown destroyed the Titans. Yeah. That's kind of what this feels like with Saquon Barkley. A high character, great guy. Every kid, every dad buying their kid a jersey feels great about it. And he's just an elite player. I mean, you watch him on that Eagles team, he's going to be a big reason that they're not the most cohesive operation right now with their head coach. And that guy, I mean, they're going to end up winning the problem for the Giants is you remove a couple years ago when they made the playoffs at 9-8. So it's not like they made the playoffs with 11 or 12 wins. I mean, they won 9 games. It was one of the great coaching jobs ever. They have been awful since they fired Tom Coughlin. I mean, and even those last couple of years of Tom, they were bad. They have been really bad for a long time now. And you got Washington, who I know they played Carolina today, but that team's going to win 10 games as long as Jaden Daniels.
The Giants are a fourth-place team for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And I do wonder, this quarterback draft, you saw Ewers and Carson Beck. So if you don't have the number one pick, it's not really like you feel great about some of these quarterbacks.
I asked
a lot of Daniel Jones in this group.
I asked an executive. I don't want to give this away. I asked an executive with Super Bowl experience about, and he's in the next few years in the quarterback market. He said, this is the year to trade down. He goes, this is not a good quarterback market. He agreed with me. He thinks Shedeur Sanders has an it quality. I think after watching
I think he's going to be the number one pick. I think Shedeur is going to be the number one pick if the draft was.
I had a friend of mine went and watched the Arizona. His son plays for Arizona. Went and watched the Wildcats, Colorado, and he was a quarterback. He was a college quarterback, my friend. And I asked him what he thought, and he said, he goes, I've heard what you've said about him. He said, I think Shedeur. He goes, Arizona's played a lot of quarterbacks and a lot of teams. He said Shedeur's easily the best quarterback. He said he made a couple of tiny window throws, moving. He's like, that's a first-round quarterback. He said, and Arizona's got a good quarterback. And he goes, you can look at all these quarterbacks, but he goes, Shedeur Sanders is a first-round quarterback when you're watching live. And my buddy's, he was a college quarterback. He knows his shit. He knows football. He goes to every Arizona game. He's like, yeah, this guy's a first-round pick. So, but I was talking to an executive this week, and he said, this is the year to be bad and trade down. He said, this is not a good group. He said, the quarterbacks are at big programs, Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame. He said, they're not first-round quarterbacks. So,
yeah, that's why I don't know if this is breaking news, but I think the Patriots are going to be in good position if they just keep playing like they're playing and you just trade back and accumulate some picks and try to build around Drake May because they're pretty terrible.
Okay, Green Bay beats Houston 24-22. And here's why this game is important. I feel like they played each other. Green Bay is the Houston of the NFC. Houston is the Green Bay of the AFC. I think both are a year away. I love their rosters. I love their young coaches, and I love their quarterbacks. Jordan Love's better than C.J. Stroud, in my opinion, moves better. Jordan's got some real Favre. He's going to have bad picks, but God, he can really let it rip. I really like watching him play. But I feel like I watched the same team, is that they're close, right coach, right quarterback, right O-line, nice weapons, not quite mature enough. There's somebody in the way. Detroit. There's somebody in the way. Kansas City. But there was an interesting moment in this game where late Houston, DeMeco Ryans settled for a field goal. And they didn't force Green Bay to burn timeouts. And I thought, well, DeMeco's a defensive coach. You got to bake that in. These guys aren't going to go for it. But as I watched this game, I thought these guys are not good enough to hoist a trophy. But if you told me over the next 4 years, because the quarterbacks, I think potentially with the right weapons are in that Jared Goff or slightly above that class. Green Bay's now 5-2, Houston 5-2. I felt like I'm watching two great franchises. After this year, they'll both be in the Super Bowl bubble for about 6 straight years.
I think Green Bay, if they get their shit together, could be a Super Bowl contender this year. And when I say that, I just mean their quarterback not throw awful
Yeah.
interceptions. I mean, he threw he moves. He's like a mirror image of Aaron, the
Yes.
mannerisms, the way he moves, the way his arm kind of hangs. But when the ball leaves his hands, it's like 2002 Brett Favre. It could be the most incredible touchdown you see of the day, or it could be a pick hitting the guy in stride where you go, is this guy going to go 70 yards the other way? I mean, today he threw 2 picks. One got returned, I think, to the 11-yard line. They had a muffed
Yeah.
punt that led to a fumble. Like that, I thought Green Bay, I mean, did CJ Stroud even throw for
No,
100 yards? They were not very good on offense. And 2 of their touchdowns, definitely one of them came on the muff punt. Obviously, Mixon, having him back. Nico Collins, it turns out, is like their Terrell Owens. You take him out of their offense, they kind of fall apart. But D'Amico's so good on offense or as a defensive coordinator, creates pressure and just creates some havoc. They got to settle this guy down. That being Jordan Love, in terms of even LaFleur made a comment after the game about like, you guys keep pushing this Favre narrative. Well, yeah, he keeps throwing the ball to the other team, but he's remarkable and he's throwing 3 or 4 touchdowns every game. And in your offense, their offense, it doesn't have the name recognition of like St. Brown, Montgomery Gibbs, Laporta, but you watch them, you're like, that receiver's good.
Oh,
that
yeah.
receiver's good. This new tight end's good. You're like, I've known Josh Jacobs is good for a while. Their offensive weaponry, and think about this, Colin, they're not going to be intimidated by Detroit. They're going to know each other really well. It's kind of like a Niners Rams from a couple years ago. So and honestly, I've always said this, they're actually better off not winning the division because the way they want to play on offense. Go into the dome. Okay, let's play a 35-30 game because you can't play that at Green Bay in the middle of January. It was always the downfall of Rodgers teams. They'd have these great offenses, and then they'd play some of these home games. It's like no one can feel their hands. Right. That's why the Chiefs are like, yeah, we can play a -20 now. We only need 18 points to win the game. And now I think their defense, this Hafley guy that they got from Boston College, it feels like he's kind of settling down. They look a lot better. The team speed's better. He's blitzing at the right times. I mean, their defense has been pretty atrocious over this, going back to McCarthy and then early on with the Joe Barry run with LaFleur. I'm not saying it's going to like completely turn the corner, but I feel a little more comfortable with it. I mean, today you hold CJ Stroud. He still has Tank Dell out there. Diggs is out there. Mixon's back. Schultz. I mean, they got enough firepower that he should be able to score, throw for 150 yards.
No.
And it was a beautiful day. It wasn't like 20 degrees at Green Bay. It looked like it was 80 degrees outside. Even the announcers like, this doesn't get any better than this.
No, it's so a Jordan Love, 24 of 33, 3 TDs, 2 picks. Here's what I like about it. So first of all, Dobbs had 8 catches, Wicks 3, Kraft, the tight end's excellent, 11 yards a catch. Jacobs out of the backfield had 5. Reed's terrific player. Christian Watson. They and what's funny is none of these guys make a nickel. I mean, they're not paying any of these guys for like 4 years.
Yeah, to me, his interceptions,
they're bad.
There was a play late in the game when they ended up kicking the game-winning field goal. I think it was like less than 30 seconds left. He let it rip like 40 yards down the field. Now he overthrew the DB and the wide receiver, but it was like, what is going? Like, why are you making this throw? Which he's I'm not a Packer fan, but keeps you on the edge of your seat when you're watching them play. Remember, he threw a late pick in the Niner game, to end that game. That's the thing that makes me nervous. It's not like Goff can't do that, but right now he's not really throwing the ball in harm's way, where Jordan Love is throwing the ball in harm's way.
Well, I mean, to your point, the Texans on the road averaged 3.4 yards a play, terrible on third down. Were allowed.
They got a muff punt at the 10-yard line. There was a free touchdown.
The Texans threw for 55 yards today, and had a chance to win that game. So to your point, Love is going to keep. I mean, if you look at the box score, Texans should have been beat by 3 touchdowns, and they lose 24-22. And I think that's a little bit of what Jordan Love gives you. It also, LaFleur, to his credit, and I think an offensive coach is more willing to do this than DeMeco Ryans. He lets him work his way through his mistakes. Like LaFleur's like, I got an artist here. I can't box him in. I got to let him do some of his stuff. One of the throws that Love likes to do, and it feels like they're almost all picked or all caught, is when he throws the rainbow ball when he's backing up and he holds it too long and he just throws a rainbow. And I'm like, he's going to work himself out of that. That those won't last in four, because that like he does that like 4 times a game.
I give LaFleur so much credit because a big reason they're 5-2 is they won the games with Malik Willis when he was gone. And now you feel like if they can just rein this guy in a little bit, and they did last year, sometimes, and listen, I'm guilty of this. This guy has not played much football, right? I mean, you look at CJ Stroud has been playing for 2 years at Ohio State, comes right to the NFL. Like he's been starting every year for 5 straight years, going back to high school. You look at some of these quarterbacks, the amount of snaps they've taken. Jordan Love just sat there for 3 years. And there gets to a point, like obviously he needed to work on his fundamentals and everything as a project, but there gets to a point where you're just not playing at all. And then he gets thrust into it. We saw last year, it took him a little while. Then he gets injured this year. So maybe by the second half of the season, they can rein him in. I think their offense is like an unnamed, I mean, the Packers fans know him, but just, people that play fantasy, but they don't have like superstar name recognition yet. Some of these guys might turn into that. By the end of the year, they might just be the same as the Lions, just in terms of their firepower. And it's actually kind of different because of his deep ball ability. I mean, that guy at any moment can fling it 50,
Absolutely.
60 yards.
Listen, you think they're ready to win a Super Bowl? I think they're a year away. I really do think it.
I'm not saying they're ready. I just think if they come in, they do have the pieces if their defense is good and he plays well. Because if he's playing well, they could beat any team. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think they're the best team that I don't think will win the Super Bowl, because I think I would take them over Minnesota. I don't know if I would. Listen, right now the
thing is, both those two teams will have to play on the road, probably, right? Minnesota, Green Bay. If they don't win, if Detroit wins the division, you're talking.
To your point, Green Bay on the road, if they get a domed environment, it's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Doesn't hurt them at all. And they're comfortable playing their divisional opponent.
The NBA season's finally back. A new season means new ways to get into the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Who's draining the threes beyond the arc? Who's crashing the boards and grabbing rebounds? Get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. If you're ready to place your first bet on something simple. Pick a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook. They have an app. Download it and place your bet. First timer, new DraftKings customers, all you have to do is bet $5. That's it, $5. You'll get 200 in bonus bets instantly. So take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download that Sportsbook app. The code is Colin, COLIN, for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets, betting just $5. Only on DraftKings, the crown is yours. Okay, so I want to talk Georgia-Texas. So Georgia beat Texas 30-15. Again, Georgia couldn't do anything offensively, and they beat Texas. So my big takeaway on this was Carson Beck is no longer a first-round quarterback. Like, he's just not. You just can't draft him in the first.
Is he a second-day quarterback?
I wrote down here, so he was 23 of 41. This is with Georgia talent. No touchdown, 3 picks. I wrote down top of third round. I mean, when I watched him, I'm like, he feels like a third-round pick. Georgia actually was decent on third down, but they only had 14 first downs. Go to Austin and double the Longhorns. But Quinn Ewers, now Texas couldn't run the ball at all. And they almost felt, I will say this, Georgia has been in so many of these big games over the last 6 years. Georgia was totally ready for the moment. Texas has been in about 3 of these. 2 or 3 with Sark. I don't think they were ready. They were atrocious on third down. They couldn't run the football. Quinn Ewers, I thought, I still think because of his arm, he'll get drafted somewhere in the first round. Somebody will think they can solve him. But I mean, Texas averaged with the best offensive line in college football, 3.4 yards a play. When I watched that game, and by the way, outside, I mean, Oregon had 2 bad games and won. Ohio State lost, but I didn't think played poorly. Bama's had a stinker. Georgia's had a stinker. Texas has had a stinker. This is why you have a 12-game playoff. This is, I mean, I think Ohio State to me is the most consistently good team, whereas Oregon got Ohio State at home. You got to be careful. They look terrible against Boise State and terrible against Idaho. I kind of look at this Texas game and I think this is just one of those games that Georgia's been in. I mean, it's just they've been in this game 6 years, probably 3 games a year like this.
I thought it was a personality game, and I've been critical over when it comes to Sark over the years, but I've slowly come around. He's clearly an excellent play caller. I saw him live. He's brilliant at that. It's clear how hard he recruits and how much passion he puts inside this program. But at the end of the day, he's a quarterback, right? That's who he is at his core. And Kirby Smart is Saban's mentee, and he's a crazy ass defensive guy. Like at his core, he's a crazy defensive guy. I mean, we've seen it on the sideline, but he's a former safety. He's a tough guy. And usually quarterbacks, like they're just not super angry all the time. Sark's more intellectual. He's more offense. This was a game, and Kirby said it after the game, like, we didn't come here to take pictures and do all the superstar BS. Well, what happened in that game? It was all about the line of scrimmage, where Texas actually has, supposedly a bunch of NFL guys. They had 7 sacks, and it felt like they had 25 pressures. And that, can you imagine how on edge Kirby was all week with just the defensive side of the ball? And the way you can't, to me, you can't manipulate that stuff. I've been in these buildings, like the head coach's personality. It is what it is. You either have the crazy, listen, Andy's not like, coming with an iron fist on everybody, but he does create toughness with the way he practices. Sark, the offensive guys, historically, Lincoln, Lane, they're just not doing Oklahoma drills. Like at a moment's notice, the Saban types, the Kirby types will just blow a whistle. Maybe not as much anymore, but that personality of a practice, you can't fake that stuff. And you could tell from the jump, you're like, Georgia is out for blood. This is a team, all they've heard about is everyone put in Texas who's new to the SEC, and they run it now. And Kirby looks around and goes, that is not happening on my watch. And they destroyed them up front. I mean, that Walker kid, he had 3 sacks. He was all over the backfield. But to have 7 sacks, and even Arch came in, you could tell. I had money on Georgia, but I then started feeling I was rooting for Arch, and right away I'm like, yeah, he looks a little overwhelmed. this is a lot. And Quinn Ewers just isn't good enough. Like, to me, Carson Beck is a 3rd-day pick. And I don't, part of a quarterback is the character and stuff. I know nothing about that, but just as a player, I just don't think he's that good. But Kirby Smart would go, I've won national championships with 3rd-day picks before. You ever heard of Stetson Bennett? I won back-to-backs with that guy. So I'm Sabans and him are comfortable playing with that. Or if you look at Sark, what did they have invested in their quarterback room between the two guys, Ewers and Arch? $5 million? Whatever they're paying Carson Beck, Kirby's like, yeah, that's probably too much. Because he wants to run the ball and play defense.
I did think, though, because of the 12-team playoff, it was the way Texas...
Sark's team's good. I don't think Texas sucks by any means. I just think that was an overwhelming performance. Georgia's probably beating everybody in the country.
And I think it's how Texas had to lose to win a national championship, because this Texas team is so pretty and so talented quarterback and so big. They win the hotel lobby. I mean, you come out at midfield, you're like, geez, these guys don't look like a college team.
I saw them live 2 weeks ago. They look remarkable at every position.
And it's like, oh no. Now, last year before the 12-team playoff, you don't want to lose like this in college football. I mean, that'll take you from 1 to 4, and all of a sudden you get to an overtime game against, some other team, and but that's how the new college football, John, with a 12-team playoff. If you want to win a natty, you need to get your butt handed to you once a year. And because these two teams, there's a better than 50% chance they'll play again. And
the Final Four, the final.
Right. So it's like, to me, as I watched it, I thought, okay, if Texas outplayed them and lost, it would be hard to go back and say, hey, guys, you got to play a perfect game. Texas was humiliated at home. And I'm writing down these numbers. They were 2 for 15 on 3rd down. They had 29 rushing yards. They got their butt handed to them at home. And my take was, in a weird way, we've talked about March Madness before. These Kansas teams, you'll play a really good team out of conference, and it's like, no, it's okay to get your butt handed to you in December, because in March, you can put the tape back into your team and say, remember this team that knocked you out?
But the one thing in March Madness, that's a good example. What's his name? Bennett just retired at Virginia, and he had that historic loss in the first round. And obviously, like any great coach, if you go to the tournament enough, you're going to have some awful losses, because only one game and anything can happen. Well, my take is really on both these two teams. And to me, if Georgia's defense plays like that, they would be hard for anyone to beat, because up front, they just smother you. But both quarterbacks, if you're playing another good team, could lose to anybody. Because Ewers, when he's bad, he just felt awful. Like, it felt like unplayable. I mean, everyone was thinking it on their couch, like, Sark, you got to go to the bullpen. It was that clear to him, which could not have been an easy thing to do. Now, granted, it's a unique situation with Arch. He's not like your typical high recruit because he goes right back to yours, but he had no choice. Like, he was playing a losing football game. Carson Beck kind of was too. So in these big games against other good teams, like, you could lose it. Will Howard, actually, I thought watching that game against Oregon,
I thought it was good.
You know, we'll see how I thought so too. But like, what if he has a bad game? Like, all these teams, we'll see Dylan Gabriel, who's probably, you know, has the best statistics of all these guys. But like, you don't have the faith like a Joe Burrow, right? Or one of those level guys that, like, no matter what, he's going to make a play. At any moment in the final 8, the final 4, these guys could have a bad game and it could cost their team this. I'm not confident in any of these teams. Like, I think they're all going to be there. It's pretty clear who's going to be the last 6, 7 teams standing right now, right? Who the best teams are. Oregon, obviously Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, like, and then a couple more we can nitpick.
Tennessee,
from like 5
maybe,
or 6.
yeah.
But it's like their quarterbacks, even Tennessee, like, their quarterback at any moment can throw the game. Like, all these guys, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, that is not the version of guy. Shador, I would have the most confidence, but they blew that Kansas State game. They're probably not going to get in, and their team wouldn't be good enough. Like, they'd have no chance to block Tennessee or Georgia. But like, if you put Shador, like the way he's playing on one of these teams, I would have a lot more confidence. I can't just with a straight face pick Georgia to win the Natty. I don't trust the quarterback. Quinn Ewers, like, I don't think he's that good, right? Will Howard, we'll find out as the season goes on. Aller made some great plays against USC, but he's got to do it against Penn, you know, he's got to do it more than one time. So he's only done it one time in his career. So I think that's the biggest question mark, you know, with all the top teams in college football, is like their quarterback. Do they get overwhelmed in a game, throw 3 or 4? Both those quarterbacks could have thrown like 5 picks each. I mean, their balls were bouncing off the other colored jersey countless times. They looked overwhelmed. They really did. Even Carson Beck, who was just, I had someone text me that he's like, I don't remember a guy, because there was a lot of media hype, but there was a lot of NFL hype.
He was a first-round pick.
Like, I don't remember a guy losing millions this fast. I mean, we're not even to Halloween, and everyone's like, oh, can't draft this guy high.
So I want to talk USC, even though they are a losing team. They're now 3-4. Because here's what is remarkable, and I think it's worth 6 or 7 minutes with us because, you know, people know I follow him. So Billy Edwards from Maryland's not a great college quarterback. They were 2 for 13 on third down. They had 56 yards rushing, and Maryland beat USC. And USC has led every game, most of them late, but because they are so egregiously bad on the offensive line and so young, they can't put together like a 12-play drive to seal wins. They had Penn State beat. They had Maryland beat. They had Minnesota. They never felt like they were in control. But it's interesting about this is that I was talking to somebody very close to USC, and he said, listen, he's got a Jimbo Fisher deal. USC's not writing $70 million checks, and they're not getting rid of him. But there's been this feeling since he's been there in the administration that he has a lot more control over USC than USC has over him. In fact, they're building this big facility now, $300 million, because it's in his contract. And if they don't build it, he can leave. But it is interesting. I actually think they have some really, really good line talent. They're just all redshirting and they're young. But what's happening with USC is fascinating. They're not recruiting California. If you go look at the rivals, take Rivals, for instance, or On3, these recruiting sites, and you go to the top 40 players in Southern California in this class, they're getting like 3 guys. It's like Bama, Oregon, Bama, Ohio State, Oregon, A&M, Louisville, Alabama. And there is something about college football. It's very territorial, John. You can lose. But if you're not in Ohio State, you just have to take a 3-star linebacker occasionally because he's an Ohio kid. You just have to do it. You got to take the tight end who's a 3-star. He's from a big high school program locally. There may be a 3-star Florida kid, but you're going to have to do certain things. You know, Ohio is proud of Ohio. LA is very transient, doesn't really care about that. But I'm hearing it now from 2 and 3 different people, like he's just not connecting with LA coaches. And it's like, can you imagine Kirby Smart doing most of his recruiting in Texas? Like there is something about Lincoln. There's this sense that he's aloof. He's not necessarily relatable. He can be off-putting. It's not just the losing. Once you start losing, people put a microscope on your program. Now you have losing. He's not really going, he doesn't wow boosters, right? Like that was the undoing for Chip Kelly. You're not winning and you don't take care of the donors and boosters. Do you think today, if USC could just go, we're starting over, would they?
Well, I think they'd both want a divorce. Like to me, Lincoln Fields has always felt, and I've said this to you from the beginning, regions and where you're from matters. In college football, does not matter in the pros. And in college football, it just does because recruiting your region, especially when it's in Southern California, when a ton of good players come from, matters. Well, who could relate? Pete Carroll. Why? He's a California guy, right? I mean, you look at the best coaches over the last, I don't know, several decades on the West Coast. Jeff Tedford, where's he from? California. Chris Peterson, where'd he coach? Boise State, Washington. Where'd he grow up? California, went to UC Davis. Mike Bellotti, where was he from? West Coast. Chip Kelly, there are outliers. Urban went to the South. Chip Kelly was the Northeast, came to Oregon. But I think for Kirby Smart, like, why does he work in the SEC? I wonder. Nick Saban, West Virginia, to me, pretty similar. Had a lot of success. You see it right now with DeBoer. He's going to get a lot of heat. He's not one of theirs. And I think the USC thing, Colin, they're 1-4 in the Big Ten. It's to me the Penn State thing. That's an awful tough loss to take, but it's still Penn State. They're really good. When you start losing to Minnesota and Maryland, especially the stat I was going to read it to you. They've, like you said, they've held a lead in every game they've played this year. And over the last 20 years, 200 teams have had a fourth quarter lead in all of their first 7 games. Only one other team during that span has had a losing record. So they're like a statistical anomaly to lose all these games. Yesterday was insane. I mean, they're up 28-14 in the fourth quarter. I mean, how does that? It's just, and this gets back to like Sark has way better talent, but you can't fake being a tough guy in football when you're not. Like Dan Campbell's a tough guy. The Harbaugh brothers are tough guys, right? Tomlin's a tough guy. Vrabel's a tough guy. Belichick could manipulate it like through mind games and the type guys he surrounded himself with. I'm not saying he's going to win a fist fight, but you'd also say Belichick's pretty mentally tough, right? I mean, he's not easy to break. And I just think I look at Lincoln and I go, I just don't see a tough guy. And they've gotten into these spots, especially on the road. These are not, you're not going to Oregon State, right? Or Arizona State where it's an easy flight. These are long. How long is the flight to Maryland? Is that a 5-hour flight, right? You go into Minnesota, that's probably 4.5 hours. These are tough travels and they just mentally crumble. And I never thought, I thought he was a really good coach, so I understood why they wanted him. LSU wanted him too.
I still think he's a very clever schemer and play designer.
But it's just like they need a defensive coordinator. And it's not like he has this long list of guys because the Leach guys, think of the tree that he comes from. It's kind of it's not a tree that produces many like tough physical football teams. That's not like his ethos as a football guy, right? The Mike Leach, the way he wants to play, he'd ideally like to win 45-38. That's how he had a lot of success in Oklahoma with the Baker teams. They were scoring a ton of points. But Colin, their schedule is not crazy hard, but you go like 7-5, 7-5. This is year 3.
They have two playable offensive tackles in the program.
Him and Brian Kelly got hired the same year, right? Year 3. And we talked about this when they got in a little scuffle about him wanting to cancel the game. He ended up beating them. But what has transpired since? You watch Brian Kelly's team, like, is LSU going to the playoffs? Probably. I mean, they might. Look, check their schedule. And they're getting better and better. And he's playing. They're both playing Nussmeier and Miller Moss. It's not like you've got Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams anymore. And I don't know, man. I think you go back. Let's just look at those two guys. Brian Kelly has a long resume. You could put him anywhere and he'll figure it out. Lincoln did inherit Oklahoma, which at the time was humming. I mean, they were a lot like Chip Kelly in Oregon. It wasn't top 2 every year, but they were top 18, 15 every year. You just had to take that next step. That's an easier thing to do than just, hey, here's a shit sandwich, Nick Saban, what Brian Kelly, get me just 11 wins every year. That's really difficult. And only what Urban can do, there's a short list of guys that can do that. Even though if Lincoln's a really good coach, I just think he fits more, I don't know, like some Big 12 team. I just think that's the way he wants to play. Well, this Big Ten has been very, very difficult on them, and it's way harder travel. Like they're like traveling like NFL teams.
Yeah,
This is conference play. You're flying 4 hours, 5 hours.
Yeah.
That never happened in the history of these
Also,
programs.
it's late October. He's getting weather breaks. Minnesota was warm, a little windy. Maryland weather was good. There's going to be years where it's snow. Like when you go to they have one playable running back, like in a big spot, a guy you would trust with the ball. They have two playable offensive tackles. We're 3 years in. Their NIL is $13 million a year. Now it's not Oregon or Georgia or Texas, but it's in the Ohio State realm. It's about 13. I was telling somebody this weekend who's really close. I said, there's 3 or 4 positions you buy in the NIL: quarterback, left tackle, edge rusher. You'll find receivers. I mean, they have an okay quarterback, left tackle. They're playing a freshman. They don't have an elite edge rusher. It's like, Lincoln, don't buy corners. That's you. This is LA. People run. You can get backs, corners, receiver. You can get those guys. You don't pay tight ends in the transfer portal. You don't pay guards in the transfer portal. They have an offensive and a defensive lineman from Wyoming, and both start. It's like, what are we doing here?
I know times are a lot different than the heyday of Pete Carroll, but when I close my eyes and I think of those rosters and when I got to college and they started really taking off, the base of the squad, and this is what you opened up saying, was all Southern California, LA and San Diego. Their best players. And then because he was such a great recruiter, he'd go get a Joe McKnight from Louisiana, this guy from New Jersey. He'd nitpick. And I get the recruiting world's changed, but to me, how do they build momentum in recruiting if he's not Mr. Pizzazz? Like, so that's not his thing. Their team's not as good. Oregon, Ohio State, I mean, Alabama and Oklahoma and these other programs for years have been coming into Southern California as USC is kind of, been in the middle ground. You see the numbers that Clay Helton through his first 34 games and Lincoln Riley, he has a better record. I just think this thing is headed toward one. Now there's so much money on the line. I don't know why, if Lincoln, why you would just give a divorce, but he's got to be kind of miserable. This can't be a natural fit living on the beach. Like, he does not feel like that guy. Pete did. I think Lane would have no problem doing it again. Like, this is not, it does not feel, when you look at Lincoln Riley, the comfortability in the colors and the clothes, and it's obviously not working because 1-4 in the Big Ten. It's one thing if you had lost to Ohio State, Penn State. I mean, they are losing to awful teams. Like, Maryland just should never have won that game, ever.
Don't have just how many players.
Do you think that there's a divorce imminent here? Or?
I think they have. I think Jen Cohen, the AD, she's gonna stay with him, but it gives her a lot of leverage.
I'm not saying they fire him, but I'm saying, do you think Lincoln's happy? Like, do you think this is this isn't working? So is this one of these things that does he want to do this?
Yeah, I think they're losing close, and the team is so young offensively. I think he can rationalize the losses and say, we bring everybody back except a running back and a center. And I do think they'll be better next year. I just think, I can assure you, Jen Cohen and the administration and the boosters, they didn't think they were winning a natty, but this has been.
Didn't think they were going 7-5 either.
5-7. Just keep your fingers crossed. Yeah. John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, 3 and Out's his podcast. Good seeing you, buddy.
See you, Colin.